Oh, no. Test. Does it work?
Test, test.
Yes, test working. I wish you a nice session. Let us know if you need us. We will be here in the room, of course. And take care. Help yourself with water.
You say Momo. He replied. He got it. 10 seconds. Yes, darling, don't worry. Just make sure my phone is. You see, my phone is not on mute. Exactly. Crew, take your seats. We're preparing to take off. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for arriving this morning for our last plenary session in our series of plenaries. I hope you have had a great conference so far. Last day is always the best. So, we're going to start with a very special person for me personally, Julia Del Amo. Julian is one of, she's a medical doctor originally, but she's also a brilliant researcher. And she's a brilliant researcher because her work always touches upon the needs of those who need it the most. When she was a professor of biomedical research in Madrid, she did an extensive work on migration and HIV, and not only for Spain, but for the whole of Europe. And I think touched the lives of many people who really needed that kind of work. And now as director of the Division of Control of HIV, STI, viral hepatitis and tuberculosis with the Spanish Ministry of Health, she's actually doing quite amazing activistic work in tackling some of the remains of discriminatory legislation in Spain, and she booked some actually impressive successes. So with Julia, you always work on basis of inspiration. So Julia, please inspire us.
Well, Thank you, Udi. What can I say after that introduction? You've raised the expectations. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to AIDSImpact for this invitation to address such an important issue on HIV-related stigma and discrimination, and I hope I can share some promises, challenges, and I really want to congratulate you for your title, Power for Action now. It's very well suited for the situation we are in. I want to acknowledge some disclosures. As Udi has said, I'm not a social scientist. I am a medical doctor, quantitative researcher. And when I accepted this responsibility to become the director of the Division for HIV Control in the Ministry of Health in Spain, we were confronted with a number of challenges regarding primary prevention and the need to implement PrEP, secondary prevention and increase uptake of testing and decrease the undiagnosed fraction, and tertiary prevention to deal with the increasing numbers of people aging with HIV, developing comorbidities, mental health issues, and the challenges to care for people who were getting older and who had to access these facilities. And it was so clear that without a very determined and committed agenda on stigma and discrimination, these challenges were not going to be met. So even if it is not your primary goal to eliminate stigma and discrimination, which for most of us here is a goal on itself, it is instrumental for success. So it is also important to have that second vision in case you need to convince policymakers that are not as convinced as us that this is a primary goal. And in this process, I really want to acknowledge Maria Jose Fuster, who is sitting here in the second row, a proper social scientist and an activist and a friend, and a woman living with HIV who's been really my guide in addressing many of these issues. So Maria Jose, thank you very much. And Josep Assad, many of you know, has been key for the work we are doing for the Spanish presidency of the EU, and I will refer in a little while. You obviously need no convincing in this session that HIV-related stigma and discrimination have harmed people living with HIV and communities most affected with it from the beginning of the epidemic, and still does. It has not gone away. And that the first responses to address stigma and discrimination came from people with HIV and from the affected communities who organized themselves, supported each other, looked after each other, and developed amazing responses, insisting on the rights, and they still do. They're still doing amazing work all over the world, and I will refer to what the community is doing in Spain. And this activism, which has been so unique in the HIV response, has changed the way we do public health, we do policy, and it has impacted art, transformed medical practice, and it has changed a number of laws and policies, though there are some that still needs changing, as Udi was referring. And from the 90s to 2015, and from 2015 to our 2030 goals on the elimination on AIDS, we have a number of commitments by international organizations that guide us on what to address, how fast, how well we are doing. And many of these indicators have included stigma and discrimination. And we are now currently in the context of the SDGs for 2030. All the SDGs have implications to the work we do, but I want to highlight two of them, SDG 3 on good health and well-being, and SDG 17 on reduced inequalities. And SDG 3.3 has the elimination of AIDS as a public health threat by 2030, which is an aim, though we are all very aware that this is probably a bit complacent and over-optimistic. And we've been guided with a number of indicators, the 95, 95, 95 testing and treatment indicators, the 10, 10, 10 societal enablers, and the reduction of HIV stigma and discrimination to 0. And this is key if we want to achieve the 95, 95, 95, 10, 10, 10, and also the reduction of the new HIV diagnosis by 90% compared to the baseline of 2010 by increasing combination prevention that also includes PrEP. And this is very closely linked to SDG 10, I said 17 before, sorry, SDG 10 on addressing the need to reduce inequalities. And within SDG 10, SDG 10.2 inspires us to empower and promote social, economic, and political inclusion of all, irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion, or economic or other status, and very closely to that, 10.3, to ensure equal opportunity and reduce inequalities of outcome, eliminating discriminatory laws, policies and practices, and promoting appropriate legislation, policies, and action. So it is all written. It's all written, and it's a matter of getting ourselves and our communities into implementing that. And the political declaration on AIDS in 2021, with this motto, End Inequalities, End AIDS, really addresses what many of us have been doing for the last 30 years. Because it is very, very clear that ending the HIV epidemic, as it has been said in this conference before, means it's not just ending onwards transmission of HIV, but really dismantling all the human rights barriers that harm and people living with HIV and keep populations behind. And I like when Maria José Fuster talks in public about this. She says, well, by 2030, I'm going to be here, so do look after us. Ending AIDS doesn't mean there's still many of us who have needs for our quality of life and for our rights, really. And in this conference, highlighting how biomedical tools obviously have had a very important, key, essential role in the ending of AIDS, there are so many social and legal barriers that need to be addressed, and the attitudes, the behaviors, the laws and the policies are unfortunately still pervaded by HIV-related stigma and discrimination. And the more you dig into it, the more you see that these laws and policies need revision and constant reviews. The definition of stigma has been discussed in this conference in a number of sessions. There is no single definition of stigma. As most of you know, it involves the negative attitudes, feelings, and beliefs about people in relation to some characteristics they possess or has been attributed to them, and in this case is HIV. And it is a complex phenomenon with several manifestations, some with an external source, structural, institutional, public stigma, or stigma by association. And others have internal sources, anticipated or internalized stigma. And discrimination is when people act on stigma, treating someone differently and negatively based on a characteristic. And discrimination has various forms of manifestations. Some of them are very subtle, because it's not only but what you do, but what you do not do. So this discrimination by omission is very subtle and needs addressing. And it can be, of course, direct, indirect, or by association. And HIV-related stigma has been defined by UNAIDS as all those negative beliefs and feelings and attitudes towards people with HIV or groups associated with people with HIV and key populations at high risk of HIV infection, people who inject drugs, sex workers, men who have sex with men, and transgender people, and migrants from high endemic countries in many settings are also key populations. And the concept of intersectional stigma that has also come across in previous sessions in this conference involves when many stigma coalesce, and the sum of all these individual stigma adds up to more just than one, that just the sum of these individual stigmas. And as Udi was saying before, I've done previous work in migrant health, and the intersectionality of stigma in migrant populations is an example of how some populations really suffer so many layers of discrimination based on their origin, ethnicity, and for undocumented migrants, this is a big issue in accessing to services. And all these things can be removed. So stigma does not grow spontaneously. It's created, and it can also be eliminated. And it needs to be eliminated because it harms people. It undermines the dignity and the equality of all human beings and damages human rights and their exercise under equal conditions, and demean and corrupt societies and those who stigmatize and discriminate. And because the different forms of discrimination need different responses and interventions, the overall response must be multi-level. And I want to share with you a multi-level response that has been one of the main areas of work that we have been doing in the Ministry of Health in these nearly 5 years, and is the Social Pact for Non-Discrimination and Equal Treatment associated to HIV. It has the translation in English sounds quite horrible. In Spanish reads better, but we couldn't do much more. And this pact was approved on the 27th of November 2018 by the Minister of Health at the time. And I want to share with you that this pact was a long requested demand from civil society. Civil society had written this document, and this document had been locked in a cupboard for a number of years. And when I got there, it was one of the first things that the community had on the table. This is a priority. So this is an example where a public administration, a Minister of Health, can work with the community. And in fact, it's a lot easier because they've done the work for you. You really, well, we had to reduce the size. It was 100 pages long, and that, it was a bit too heavy, but we did a lot of work, and this pact acknowledges the need to provide consistent and stable multi-sectorial and intersectorial responses to address structural discrimination against people with HIV, involving all actors, establishing alliances to address other forms of discrimination, be those by gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, or other medical conditions. And this is very important because we all know that HIV has been a motor for change, not only about people affected with HIV, but also what happens to others, how can we inspire others, and this has been a model for action, and I have some examples of how this has been happening in Spain. So we've been working, we are still working as we speak. Only last week, a new legislation was approved in the official gazette to allow people living with HIV to have arms. Don't ask me why, but people with HIV were not allowed to have arms. That meant they could not work in private security. So you have to review all these things, and this only happened last week. So we've been working over these years, and this social pact aims to eliminate stigma and discrimination towards people living with HIV by actions by public administrations and political actors, the academic, the private sector, always in close collaboration with civil society. We aim to champion and guarantee equal opportunities, work towards social acceptance, reduce the impact of stigma, and generate knowledge and fill the gaps to guide policies and actions. And this is the first example that was put into place, an agreement signed by the Council of Ministers in November 2018, and this agreement by 7 of the ministries involved agreed to eliminate HIV as a disqualifier to access public service, both for civil and for military. People with HIV could not access the army. It was not clear people with HIV could not access the army, but there was a disqualifier, chronic immune deficiency that requires lifelong treatment. So this kind of caveats affected the rights of people with HIV accessing public service. So there was discussions with these ministries, and all these public calls for exams for civilian and military officials, all of the public calls were reviewed by an interdisciplinary team integrated by members of NGOs working in HIV, and we reviewed all of this. It was very boring because all this wording, all this bureaucratic, it was, gosh, but it was done. After you eliminate that, it's gone. And we did that also for diabetes mellitus, for psoriasis and celiac disease. And now there are more that are knocking on the door. Hi, why people with inflammatory bowel disease are discriminated against? Can we be judged equally? So this is opening the door, but it's not us doing that work, thankfully. So another example of action with other kind of actors, with health, policy and social actors, was again an agreement of the interterritorial councils of health and social services for all regions in Spain. Spain is a highly decentralized country, it's like a federal state, and all these regions met and agreed that it is forbidden to discriminate anyone who is living with HIV to access care in a home for elderly people. Again, it was not clear, it was not written, we discriminate against people with HIV, but there were caveats into that allowed people to be discriminated. Now, this may still be happening, but people can challenge the system because there is a legal document that says to the home, you cannot do this. And another example of collaboration, in this case with the academic actors and with civil society, is a collaboration where the Ministry of Health allocated funds, allocated money to work with the Spanish coordination body of NGOs called CESIDA and the University of Alcalá, who works with SEISIDA and with Trabajando en Positivo. So we got all the key actors involved together, and this agreement has three main aims: the analysis of legal norms enforced in Spanish legal system at national, regional and municipal level, which discriminate or limits rights people with HIV. We are conducting studies that allow to know attitudes of the Spanish population towards people with HIV, and developing the stigma index. And we are also promoting initiatives to reduce discrimination in the workplace. And as we speak, we're working with municipal actors because we are reviewing policies at national level, like I've just mentioned to you, these policies that did not allow people working with HIV to carry arms, therefore work in private security. But in some municipalities, if you're HIV positive, you cannot have a taxi driving license. Don't ask me why. Or fire brigade in some regions. It's not all regions, it depends, because discrimination is random, and some of these laws are still imbricated, so you have to dig in and remove that. And people who discriminate are shocked. How come? I mean, this is ridiculous. So they're even shocked themselves. So we are doing this work as we speak, addressing this. And yesterday, Carlos Prats gave an amazing, I was so moved listening to you, Carlos, how in AIDSImpact, the work of this agreement can be shown in the study we're doing to inform about the evolution of attitudes and beliefs. We're also working with the private sector, and this is an example of collaboration with insurance companies. Insurance companies discriminate against people with HIV in accessing insurance. It's very important to access life insurance if you want to buy a house, have a mortgage, and access homes. And it's very different if you approach insurances from an NGO or from a Ministry of Health, because they love coming to the Ministry of Health, and you organize a meeting in one of these rooms with all these pictures, and people feel very well treated, and they really want to collaborate. So they really are showing a big interest. One of the things they said, we said, well, let's review your policy document. And this policy document still had that AIDS definition from the 90s. I mean, they're not updated. So we've produced an updated life expectancy of people with HIV now to show, as Ramon, one of our colleagues, was saying, you are losing customers. So it's also important that they understand that there is a mutual benefit. I was referring before that the first responses came up from people living with HIV and the affected communities who organized themselves and still do. And I'm finishing. Yeah, I'm finishing. And this is an amazing example, also within the Social Pact of non-discrimination, the first HIV positive Pride that was conducted, I'm quite humble to say, in the world, but it's true, Maria Jose is in the world. The community of people living with HIV did this last year, 19th of November, with the motto, visibilidad igual a dignidad, visibility equals dignity, and they organized this amazing demonstration. It was a really, really moving day, but within the week of the HIV positive Pride, we did a number of things. And one of the amazing things was the premiere of Círculo Rojo, which was a play which was shown as a premiere in the Ministry of Health. So it was a bit chaotic because we had all these people coming in the evening. The Minister of Health was in the front row, listening to these 4 actors, one of them a close friend of us who is not a professional actor. They had written their plays during the COVID pandemic, and they were expressing what discrimination was like for them. So it was an amazing act of activism and public health. And then the women came and they did Mujeres con V, Women with a V. The premiere was in the Ministry of Culture, but we had the second opportunity. Some of these women, 2 of the women in the play are still not visible. This is why one of them is covering her face with a wig. And it was also an amazing story of the women issues affecting stigma and discrimination. So this was really, really amazing, and I'm grateful I mean, it was great. So to end, all of this work gave us the possibility to promote having the elimination of HIV-related stigma and discrimination as a political priority of the Spanish EU presidency, which is starting 1st of July this year. And we had done all the work, but we needed the political support. And our previous Minister of Health, Carolina Darias, was very supportive. She really believed in this work, and she promoted this, and now this is accepted. So this is in the agenda of the Spanish presidency, and we're working with ECDC, with WHO Europe, with UNAIDS, with SEICIDA, on a technical document that will lead to the conclusions of a high-level meeting which will take place in Seville, 15th of September this year. And AIDSImpact has had the document. I think we've received your feedback already. We've got feedback of over 25 organizations. Many of you are here, so thank you very much. And we look forward to amazing conclusions and to move the international and the European agenda on stigma and discrimination. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Julia. Please, take the opportunity, all the people on the sides, to come inside. There's plenty of room on the right-hand side of the. Wow.
Okay, so now it's my pleasure to introduce Perrine Roux. Perrine Roux is a public health researcher with over 20 years of experience in the fields of HIV, hepatitis, and harm reduction. Perrine is based in Marseille. She currently leads a research group in the CESTIM unit on community-based participatory research on HIV and harm reduction, and has over 80 publications in this field. So Perry is a very good colleague of mine, but she's more than that. She's a close friend. She's my scientific daughter, and I'm very happy to listen to her now.
I'm going to cry. Thank you. Thank you, Bruno. Thanks to you for being here this morning. Thank you for the invitation to present community-based participatory research, which is a very important topic for me and for my team. For simplicity, today I'm going to use the term community-based research instead of community-based participatory research, which is not exactly the same. So, first of all, I'm going to give the definition of community-based research. Several definitions exist. I like to share the one presented in the book published by the French AIDS Agency in 2012, a research that is based on doing with people and not for people, and described with 4 dimensions: a mobilization of concerned groups at all steps of the research process, a bottom-up approach from the emergence of the research question to the findings and their dissemination, a research that uses and recognizes lay knowledge and living with expertise, where people from communities become peer researchers. And finally, a research that leads to social transformation, the scientific results being used for advocacy. Also, CBR has been implemented in several public health fields over the years. It is the field of HIV which has contributed most to improving how we conduct this kind of research. When clinical research first started on HIV patients and non-infected people from key affected populations, mainly LGBT communities, played a crucial role. They advocated equity and rapid access to art. They helped scientists to better understand key factors of adherence to art. They contributed to ensure that quality of life was included as an outcome in clinical trials and not only biological criteria. Some of these consequences of active participation in research were described by Epstein in Impure Science, where he showed how the AIDS movement and activism have transformed biomedical research practices. This two-way meeting between community-based organizations and scientists had important repercussions on HIV research and for science more globally. People from communities started to take part in research projects, and this participated in the development of CBR. Here are some examples of major intervention evaluated by CBR in the field of HIV. Community-based HIV testing for men who have sex with men, with a view to improve access to testing and care. On-demand PrEP, thanks to the well-known Hypergay clinical trial that demonstrated the efficacy of on-demand PrEP to prevent HIV acquisition in MSM. Peer navigation to facilitate access to HIV care, widely promoted by CBR. And finally, I would like to mention the work by Coalition Plus, a network of HIV community-based organizations which is actively involved in designing CBR projects and bringing science to key population. I encourage you to go to the afternoon symposium of Coalition Plus, where they will present the results of a large program conducted with several community-based organizations during the COVID-19 crisis. However, despite its important contribution to HIV and other fields of research, CBR in the field of harm reduction is less developed. So before explaining how CBR should contribute to harm reduction, I will briefly define what harm reduction is. Sorry for those who already know what it is, but it's important to remind what it is. It is a public health approach that aims to reduce the negative consequences of drug use by implementing different strategies at the individual, local, and political level. It concerns all types of drug use, whether experimental, recreational, or problematic, whether someone is receiving care or not. It is a holistic and pragmatic approach that takes into account the individual in her globality. Beyond health objectives, harm reduction also has social and legal objectives. And it is a participative approach which implies social transformation. It is based on several principles: respect the right of people who use drugs, do not judge, provide the means to reduce risks, encourage drug users to be autonomous, go to meet people in their living environment, involve people who use drugs in the construction of harm reduction. Several harm reduction based interventions have already been designed and implemented in collaboration with communities. The best known are needle exchange program and opioid agonist treatment, and more recently, drug consumption rooms and drug checking. Despite this intervention, there is a place for great improvement in how CBR can contribute to harm reduction. In the following slide, I will discuss how CBR, in my opinion, should contribute to this field. First, CBR should help to reach minoritized and hidden population. This includes women. Women have always been less visible than men in harm reduction programs because of greater discrimination related to drug use and gender issues. Vulnerable population for whom harm reduction responses to date have been inadequate, racialized communities and also the homeless population. Another interesting population, the psychonauts, the people who use drugs who are web connected, sharing information and knowledge about their drug use and their living condition. They are an interesting population to work with as they have a great deal of experience-based knowledge and which can be shared with researchers. Second, CBR should contribute to harm reduction through the use of less stigmatizing terms. As the International Network of People Who Use Drugs explained clearly in its report, Words Matter, it is possible to decrease stigmatization by using more appropriate non-abstinent or relapse users. People who previously used drugs instead of the well-known word clean. Regarding treatment for opioid dependence, communities prefer the term opioid agonist treatment to substitution therapies or replacement. In their opinion, effective treatment for opioid dependence is not simply replacing or substituting one drug for another. Another important contribution of using CBR in harm reduction should be the choice of more relevant research questions. Communities help us to look at problem or phenomenon differently. For example, in an academic context where a research question might be what intervention could encourage abstinence among people who use drugs, communities might suggest to use a different question like what intervention could be proposed to reduce harms due to drug use. Another example would be how can we reduce stigma in access to care instead of how can we improve retention in care. Or instead of asking how can we encourage abstinence, we could ask how can we encourage empowerment. Another would be what are the positive effects of drugs instead of what are the negative effects of drugs. So if we are going to use these different types of research questions, we must use a suitable methodology to better understand not only individual factors, but also structural factors in drug use and access to prevention and care. One example is a socio-ecological model using an interdisciplinary approach, which has been largely promoted in many previous sessions in the conference. In the field of intervention studies in harm reduction, CBR should help evaluate relevant interventions that have been designed by the communities. For example, our research team have evaluated an educational intervention called IRLI, or It's Easy in English, for people who inject drugs to reduce harmful practices. This has been evaluated in several countries, in France first, but then in Bulgaria, Romania, Greece, and Portugal. The intervention was initially designed by two NGOs, AID and Médecins du Monde. More recently, I was happy to read about Professor David Fielin, an interest in CBR. Dr. Fielin is a renowned researcher in the field of addiction medicine in the US, and specifically in an article from the last year, he called for CBR to help health system to provide precision medicine for people with opioid dependence in the terrible context of the opioid crisis in the US. Furthermore, our colleague Magdalena Harris, who is a sociologist at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, recently proposed an intervention to develop training for care providers in order to reduce stigma. The final step of any research process is the dissemination of the results. CBR leads to social change by advocating scientific results. I will now give you 3 examples of CBR-related advocacy in the field of harm reduction. A few years ago, the Open Society Foundation advocated access to opioid agonist treatment, buprenorphine and methadone, by using publication, including ours, to help this advocacy. OAT needs to be still promoted, but it also needs to be researched. In order to do that, research projects advocating change in OAT need to involve communities, and this can be done through CBR. The global advocacy campaign, Support Don't Punish, was launched in 2013 to advocate changes to drug policies in order to decriminalize drug use. We, researchers, need to work with communities to nourish this advocacy. To do so, CBR is a powerful approach. And more recently, the opioid crisis in the US has led several activist movements, especially driven by the fact that access to opioid agonist treatment and harm reduction services are still very much lacking in the country. The recent protest from the photographer Nan Goldin was inspired by AIDS activism. I recommend to watch the movie of Nan Goldin. Today, the situation is still critical and we need to call for evidence-based advocacy. Another example of advocacy at a more local level, so in Marseille, where activists and scientists are trying to work together to promote the opening of a drug consumption room. So if you can sign this and share this petition by scanning the QR code, please do it. It will counteract one launched by the extreme right wing, which is also very active, and we really need to have your signature to help the promotion of the opening of this drug consumption room. Thank you. So, as another example, finally, I would like to share with you an initiative of our research team, which created to help develop CBR in the field of harm reduction, a network composed with community-based organization and people who use drugs organization, and research laboratories. It's called AREN, an interdisciplinary and community-based harm reduction research network. It has been developed out of a desire to pool academic experience and experiential knowledge in order to respond appropriately and effectively to the needs of people who use drugs. So the aim of this network is to improve the way of conducting CBR, to create links between researchers and communities, and of course to develop a competitive research project and evidence-based advocacy. And finally, I would like to thank all the communities involved in our project for continuing to share their time and their experience and their services with researchers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please use this opportunity again to come on in. Just keep coming in. You're very welcome. Our next speakers are a duo. You know, why not do something a bit exciting? Professor Xiaoming Li, who's going to stand up and bow to us. Xiaoming is an international researcher, and you can read all his stuff, but he's waving. He's an enabler and a thinker. He's got international work all over the globe, and as an enabler, he feels that he should give his talk jointly with a very creative and exciting Dr. Banki Olatosi, and it looks to me like instead of two of them standing here, he's going to give directions from the audience, like the conductor, Andre Previn, and it looks to me like Banki is going to really tell us about the growing importance of big data, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to AIDSImpact for inviting us to have a conversation on this topic. I would like to first set the stage by saying that not everything about big data is bad. Big data does have something to do to help us improve our world, to help us improve the care of people with HIV, who are aging and deserve the type of care and quality of care that every other person should get. So I just ask that you listen to us and see what the opportunities are, and hear and trust and believe that there's some good that can come out of this. So thank you again for that. So I will go ahead and set the stage by acknowledging the work we've done so far in this space of funders. Oh, it's not showing. Okay. All right. We've been funded in our work by the National Institutes of Health Agency, National Science Foundation, our university, and we work very closely with our Department of Health because the work we do is translated to care for people with HIV in the state of South Carolina, and our Office of Revenue Affairs. So today's journey, I'm going to take you on a journey. I'm going to start with the future in mind, so you see what the options are and the potential benefits of data science applied to health. Talk about the types, introduce you to some of the application, give an idea of some of the opportunities for data generation, making a case especially for leaving no one behind or no country behind, and you'll see what I mean as I go through this presentation. Give you some use case practical examples based on the work we've done so far, and also highlight some of the opportunities and challenges that we have in the field. So I'd like to also start with this. How many people have heard of this new shiny thing called ChatGPT? Okay, good. This is not ChatGPT, so let's just get that out of the word first. All right. So again, going back to this future in mind that I talked about, data is collected in many ways and many levels on a daily basis. Even as you're seated now, data has been collected on you. You have wearables, watches, you have cell phones, you have different things, and in that data is intelligence and knowledge that can be leveraged in a very positive way. You see, every human is a creature of habit, and you might not believe it, but you do the same things, or often over time. And if we can leverage that, we can help improve your health, or even help predict to you how to improve your health. And so those are some of the benefits here. So we'll talk about this from today as using this in an opportunity that has already been used in different fields in banking and other places. But in healthcare, we're very resistant, and we don't see the benefit in it as much as we should. So we'll talk about the volume variety that we have, the volume being collected, where healthcare is projected to collect 32% more data than any other industry in the world over the next 5 years. And that's because we've made improvements in our data collection. And the one benefit COVID has done is force health systems across the world to even collect more data, so we're ready for the next epidemic whenever, or pandemic whenever that happens. So there are multiple data sources that we have that we're collecting, and there's volumes and variety of data that we're collecting that provide a lot of insight into what we can predict. There are massive data repositories being collected, whether from funding agencies to governments, again, recognizing the value and the power of big data. But one thing that we also need to temper with this is the patient spends a very short time in health systems. Most of the patient lives is outside the health system. So even though we focus on episodic care, we have to use data that also gives us some contextual understanding of what happens to that patient or that individual outside of the health system. Like I mentioned, we are posting on social media, we're wearing wearables, we've got the Internet of Things. So we've got data that we can get intelligence and a lot of decisions from, and we need to be open to this so that we can find a way to make our HIV treatment cascade, continuum of care better. Right, and prepare for our friends and families as they age with HIV. So it's all about decision making and being able to extract intelligence from the data that we have. All right, so having said that, role in big data in accelerating treatment, we have seen this been applied in many ways and potentials for it and been applied in many ways. This is a schematic that gives you a concept of this. We can continually do what we call in big data active learning. We take the data and we feed it back into it, and what we learn from what works and what fails, we can use it to make refinements and make the treatments better, and we can do it in real time and faster and more quicker. The other application of this is their potentials to do a lot of things. Cost savings, for example, efficiencies, so we're not doing waste, so that we're not causing unnecessary harm, making people get tests that they do not need to get. One of my firm beliefs is at this point in our time in this world, we have to start looking at personalized medicine. I love the last speaker when you mentioned about precision medicine for opioid. It should be precision medicine right now for people with HIV, because you've seen one person living with HIV. They have different things, different factors, different issues going on, and we cannot continue to do this generalistic approach to treatment. We're not going to get the best outcomes of care, and our old excuse was we didn't have the data. Today we have the data and we're collecting the data. Just to give you a quick overview of data types. So we talk about big data, and sometimes people say, what does that mean? So we've got two types basically. You've got structured and unstructured data. So data collected in the health system, your health visits, diagnostic data. We have standardized codes for that, ICD-10 codes. And then you got unstructured data, which are clinical notes. And clinical notes, as much as it's a nightmare for data scientists because we've got to scrape the data and use natural learning processes, it has rich information because the diagnosis only says this is the outcome. It doesn't tell you that this patient has homelessness, has family issues, has all of those things. And again, those are factors that help to define the individual and allow us to provide very specified care. Then we got the type of orientation that we do and what we're doing with big data. So we've got patient-oriented care. We can pull that from the electronic health records, or we've got national biobanks that collect even more extensive data at a national level or at scale that we can leverage depending on where you are within the industry. What you do with that, again, is dependent on the goal of what you're trying to achieve. Whether I'm trying to get a patient to show up for appointments so I can target them and say, you're more likely to miss your appointment in 3 months. So I can get all the resources to you because my goal is to get you in. Or if I want to look at the data from a social media perspective and say, are you going to use Grindr or Grindr? Are you going to use Tinder? Are you going to use all of this? Or are you going to use Twitter? All of those pieces come into play. So there are multiple applications of big data and how we can use it, and there are multiple sources of data that we can leverage. Now, coming back to my big data generation thing about biobanks, I'm going to show you a map now just to show you where the largest and most established biobanks are in the world. By the way, congratulations, Sweden, you make the map, right? But if you look at that map, we are starting to leave people behind. So if you look at the bottom of the map, you'll see that, for example, African countries don't have any biobanks. All those countries don't have those biobanks. What we know in data science is that when we can get genomic information, more invasive measures, all of those things, it helps with the predictive model, makes it even more powerful. And so it is our challenge to ask that the richer nations that are doing all of these great things transfer those technologies down. It is not too hard to do. It's not too hard to collect. But if we don't collect it, we don't have the data to build algorithms that are going to be powerful enough to achieve the goals in those other fields and to help people with HIV in other parts of the world. So that's one of the things I wanted to point out. All right, so I'm going to go to some case use examples. So you say big data, how do you use it? We use it from the context of what we've done so far in South Carolina and give you how that has actually helped. This is a grant funded by the NIH. It's about engagement and retention in care. It is very difficult to find someone who drops out of HIV care in our health system. It's difficult, it's expensive, plus the individual is not getting the kind of HIV medical care that they need. So our goal is to see, can we predict for the provider when that person living with HIV sits in front of them, whether that person is going to drop out of care or remain in care. And if they're going to drop out of care, we want them to provide all the resources, additional resources to help. That person doesn't even know they're going to drop out of care. We know based on the algorithm that we've built. So that was our purpose. In this study, we looked at best ways to use machine learning methods to predict this classification problem of, are you going to be in care or are you going to drop out of care? And we wanted to look at methods that did that using historical data that had already been collected from our repository. And this basis was ending the HIV epidemic in the United States. So we looked at it from the viewpoint of taking surveillance, using surveillance data and using it to leverage treatment or maximize treatment. And then we also looked at it for data linkage purposes, so we can get people into care fastest and keep them in care, and also how we can look at missed opportunities, because this is the myth that people will get out of HIV medical care suddenly disappear. No. For different reasons, again, we've talked about in the conference, they could have been treated badly, there could be a stigma, they're still using healthcare. They're just not using HIV medical care, so they're not getting antiretroviral treatment. So they're willing to come into the system. What have we done to keep them away from HIV medical care? And so using the data and data science, we can use this to pull this back. So we looked at this and said, can we look at how we link and integrate our existing historical data from episodes of care that have happened to predict what the future health status would be, and then look at which are the models that perform the best based off of that. Now, how could we do this? And we do want to talk about what we have in South Carolina that gave us the opportunity to do that. By chance, in the 80s, I mean, if you know the United States, I'm from South Carolina. There's a unique characteristic of South Carolina. But what was unique about that is South Carolina does what we call name-based HIV reporting. So if you're diagnosed with HIV in the state of South Carolina, anywhere in the state of South Carolina, your name goes to the state government and it stays in the health department. That health department then takes that data and they connect your HIV utilization data, and any medical utilization that you do in the state of South Carolina can be linked. An independent body does that for us that is allowed by the state. They give that individual a unique identifier. We don't need to know who that person is for confidentiality and ethical reasons, but we need to have that unique identifier to see the temporal patterns, longitudinal patterns of what happens with that person's care. We then take that to build a model. So our starting point is all the data that is reported to the health department, which is about 21,000 people living with HIV. That is linked at the individual level. That data then, by law, all CD4 and viral loads have to also be reported in the state of South Carolina. So we get the CD4 and viral load test. We link that to hospital utilization data sets and other data sets, and then other contextual data sets. So we have a very robust picture of where that person is utilizing care, and we can connect, and we have it at the population level. This is a schematic of the data that we have in terms of where the data sources are being linked. So we've got from prisons, because people who are in prisons with HIV are still people. So we want to find out to make sure that the care they're receiving is the top care. We connect that to those who use social services, those who use hospitals, hospitalized, who use social services, emergency services. So this are all the data points that we connect and link across our system for this analysis. And we have our disease registries too. And this conceptually is what we do. We put all of those data together and we put it from a bucket perspective. We connect it at the individual level so we can find clusters of patients that look alike and do predictions based on those clusters, not just on the aggregate, but on clusters and to the individual level. So we pull all of the data sources together and we linked it under the data project, and we brought it to that point. This is what our results were in terms of our methods. We were doing a classification problem in this case analysis. So we were reducing high volume, high dimensionality data sets. We had over 3.7 million rows of data. Classification problem is whether you're in care or not in care. And then we use several algorithms to see which are the algorithms that work the best. Just gives a schematic of some of the algorithms we use for our tenfold validation. This is the results, and this is why it's important, because do not do well with nonlinear combinations, right? So if you have multiple combinations of features of variables that predict someone's behavior, standard models don't do well with that. Machine learning models do better with that, and so we're able to do that. So this shows our random forest decision tree classification. We can see the combinations. Everywhere you see the arrows pointed out is where the pruning occurs. That's a cluster of patients and combinations of clusters, and then goes to our prediction of whether you're going to be in care or not in care, so that we're able to interpret our models very quickly. All right, we got some of our other pieces, neural networks, prediction performance, again, giving us an idea of how well it's predicting recall bias. And then this is the clinical and policy implications of this. We want to know who's likely not to be in care. Again, engage with our providers on that. Second example, we're doing viral failures, blips, for, again, a very unique set of patients that fail regardless of the regimens that they have. Can we use that? Can we predict that so before they fail, we can intervene? So we can measure what's going on with those viral rebounds and look at different data sets. Other things that we use the geospatial big data to see what happened with COVID in terms of facility utilization, where people stopped going, where people stopped showing up. We use social media data to track population movement, cell phone data to see what was happening across our systems. We created dashboards that we could use to look at connectivity and person to place patterns of behaviors. Finally, we looked at utilization distribution of which facilities were we not finding people with HIV going to prior, after COVID occurred, so we can actually look at things we could do. So, as good as this sounds, there's still barriers, opportunities, and things we can do and improve on. Access to data is really still difficult. The data we talked about that we produce now, it took us on average 2.5 years to negotiate agreements to be able to get access to that. They all sit in different organizations and systems, and yet if we're going to truly take care of the individual, we need to bring all of those data pieces together. Data sharing is still a challenge, the complexities of the data, but there's hope. There's hope that if we do this and we do it on a scalable way, we can get to the point where we truly can provide precision medicine to persons living with HIV, such that I can predict if you're going to have a heart attack. Why? You've been watching a watch that collects information on a daily basis, on a hourly basis, on your heart rate, on different things. And it can be sent to your doctor's office such that when the heart attack wants to happen, there's an ambulance in front of your door waiting and saying, hey, it's about time. Come on, let's go. All right. So in summary, this is my challenge. It's not if, but how are we going to leverage data science and how are we going to use it? It's not when, it's now. It's for us to start now, to start using it. AI is not going anywhere. People might hate artificial intelligence, but it's here to stay. ChatGPT, right? We've had it before, but people didn't call it ChatGPT. It's shiny and new now, but for us in data science, it's simply natural language processing. So that's fine. The world can go crazy about it, but how can we use this for healthcare and for improving the care? Leave no system behind. Leave no one behind, right? So we've got the richer countries that are doing well in this field, and funders, we need to do it at the same level everywhere in the world, because everywhere in the world where one person with HIV is living, they deserve the same type of care as where the richer countries are. It should be personal, right? Make it personal, improve the quality of life. Again, I don't do this in as one person. Our top leader and our domain expert is a HIV physician. We've got people with HIV on our team. We have a patient engagement studio that we use. We have multiple team members coming together to do this. Thank you so much, and it's been great talking to you.
Thank you, Banky. I've now disconnected my watch, my phone, and I'm going to chair from underneath the table. Wow, okay. And then in every conference you have a moment when you have somebody amazing who's going to talk to us next, which just shows a slew of amazing talks this morning. Rina Jananyuasuk, who's going to join us from Thailand. It is just such a pleasure and a privilege. You can all see from the website the work and the innovation and the leadership she's shown in Thailand, in her region and in the world. And we look so forward to your talk. Thank you, Rina.
Thank you very much, Professor Laurentia and the organizing committee for giving me this opportunity to speak. So it's my first time attending the AIDSImpact conference. So I will bring back about this experience and share with my colleagues here back there in Bangkok, Thailand. So my presentations today will be around the roles of the key population-led health services in HIV response in Thailand. And the outline of my talk will include, I will share with you about the journey of the key population-led health services, as well as the contribution, challenges in terms of institutionalizing the key population-led health services in Thailand. So this presentation showing you about the journey of the KP-led health services in my country, Thailand. Starting from your left-hand side, you can see that like other countries in the region, Thailand, and also in Thailand, the roles of the community-led or community-based organizations were very limited and were focusing around outreach activities. In 2011, the community-based organization in Thailand, they were thinking about how are they going to bring the HIV services to the community where they live. And they started working with nurses and medical technologists to come and to conduct HIV testing at their community organization. And in 2015, we worked with the community and key populations member to implement an implementation study under the key population-led HIV test and treat. Under this study protocol, we actually conduct a training and a series of capacity building intervention to allow trained key population lay providers, including men who have sex with men, transgender women, and sex workers, to be able to perform some certain level of the HIV clinical services. And these include HIV counseling, finger prick blood collection for HIV testing, and also sample collection for chlamydia and gonorrhea testing. And all of this data have been used to advocate for policy change, to create the national dialogues and work with the national stakeholders. And a year later, we have also conducted a sub-study called Key Population-Led PrEP Services. Under this sub-study, the study allowed trained and certified key population-led providers to be able to dispense pre-exposure prophylaxis or PrEP, with the medical supervision from the physicians who are working at the provincial public hospital. And during these 5 or 7 years, all of these data were used to change the policy until in 2019, the Ministry of Public Health, they has endorsed the ministerial regulation to allow trained and certified key population-led provider to perform some certain level of the clinical services that I have already shared with you before. Right now, the trained key population-led provider, they are able to perform finger prick blood collection for HIV testing, sample collection for chlamydia and gonorrhea testing, and they're also able to dispense PrEP, PEP, and STI oral medicine treatment, which has been prescribed by the physicians. And the next slide shows you the contribution of the key population-led health services in Thailand. This slide shows you the data that 82% of the current Thai PrEP users came from 11 key population-led PrEP services across the country. However, we are not working better in terms of scaling up and expanding the key population-led health services model in our country. When against with the national PrEP target, the country has only achieved 22% of the national PrEP target overall. So there's a clear need to establish and to expand and scale up this model throughout the country. And the roles of the key population-led health services is not only focusing on HIV prevention cascade, but it has been expanded to HIV care and treatment cascade as well. In this slide, you can see that it's actually the data coming from an implementation study on the community-led same-day antiretroviral treatment initiation, where we conducted a pilot study at the two community-based organizations. One, they're primarily working with men who have sex with men and transgender women. And another, they're serving transgender and female sex workers as well as male sex workers in Bangkok. And these data showing on your right-hand side, after being trained, strengthened the capacity in order to provide clinical services, the key population lay providers, they are able to initiate antiretroviral treatment on the same day of the HIV diagnosis. On your right-hand side, you can see that around 84% of those who were diagnosed HIV at the community-based organization, they were successfully initiated ART on the same day of the diagnosis. And the remaining 15%, they were able to initiate ART on the next day. And here is another example from, as part of the key population-led health service model, it's the Tangerine Clinic where I come from. So the Tangerine Clinic is located in Bangkok, Thailand, and is the first transgender-led, gender-affirming into a stigma-free sexual health clinic. The Tangerine Clinic was established in 2015. All the staff providing the services to their community, they are transgender people. And we're working closely with the gender-sensitive healthcare providers to ensure that our transgender client will be able to access to healthcare services. And here are the list of the comprehensive healthcare service that we are offering to the transgender clients at the Tangerine Clinic. You can see that on your right-hand side, the sexual health services include HIV testing, STI screening, treatment. We also offer other care which is related to neo-vagina because they don't know where to go after they have undergone genital surgery. And we also offer vaccination program for HPV, hepatitis A, and hepatitis B as well. However, we are not working around sexual health alone. We're actually working starting from your left-hand side, you can see that it's around hormone-related services. We use gender-affirming care to create an entry point services in order to generate health demand among the transgender population to come to use the services at the Tangerine Clinic. And we're quite successful in terms of linking these populations into sexual health services, including HIV testing or PrEP or even other STI screening and treatment. And at the down below, you can see that we are offer or integrate other mental health and well-being services as well. Right now, our trained transgender counselor, they are able to offer psychosocial support counseling, interpersonal counseling, or even motivational counseling. And at the clinic, we're also having a psychiatrist who come to provide the clinical care to the transgender clients 1 or twice a week, depending on the volume of the clients. And in addition to that, we are also offer wraparound services. For example, for those who wish to have minor gender-affirming surgery, for example, rhinoplasty, we are able to provide these services at the clinic as well. In addition to that, we offers the services around skincare, aesthetics, as well as Botox, because we know that many transgender in Thailand, they share syringe and needles for hormone injection or even Botox injection. So we're trying to address other unmet healthcare needs for this population in order to link them to the sexual health services that we are aiming to. And here are the service data from the Tangerine Clinic. It was actually the data from 2020 to last year. You can see that starting from your left-hand side, the Tangerine Clinic is able to serve more than 5,000 of the transgender individuals. Of those, 93% are trans women, or they identify themselves in a trans feminine spectrum. And you can see that the HIV testing uptake among these women was very high. It was 93%. And we found almost 10% they were diagnosed with HIV. And 90% they were successfully linking to initiate ART, mostly on the same day of the HIV diagnosis. Of those who without HIV, we are able to link 24% into PrEP services. I know this is the data around PrEP is not that impressive, so it's still challenging for us to find a way or solution to increase PrEP uptake among these populations. In terms of other sexually transmitted infections, we have seen around almost 30% they were tested either or both chlamydia and gonorrhea positive, and around 9% they were tested syphilis reactive as well. So this slide, it's showing you about the demographic and characteristic data among transgender women clients. The median age of these women was around 26 years old. More than half of the women who came to use the services, they're having below bachelor degrees education. 24% they were unemployed at baseline. 37% they reported having depressive symptoms when screened by PHQ-9. 18% engaging in sex work, and almost 10% reported using amphetamine type stimulant or ATS at baseline as well. So it's really showing that by having the transgender-led and integrated care clinic, we are able to reach to the most vulnerable among the vulnerable populations in Thailand. And here, I would like to share with you about the first national initiative that we launched, the first transgender PrEP specific campaign. Because in the past 10 years, all the PrEP programs or campaigns were focusing around men who have sex with men and other gay men in the country. So we thought that while leaving these women behind, we should do something. So we have collaborated with other national stakeholders, including the Bangkok Metropolitan Administration and Ministry of Public Health, as well as USAID and PEPFAR, to launch PrEP in the City campaign. I know if you are at my age or older, you may be familiar with Sex in the City, right? So we kind of feature 4 different characters of Thai transgender women, you know, in this campaign. And they represented different backgrounds of transgender women. They can be transgender office worker, transgender youth, transgender celebrities, or even transgender sex workers. And PrEP messages have been integrated positively as part of their daily life. We use the messages, we're not stigmatizing PrEP, you know, with the transgender women, but we use PrEP as part of empowering messages in order to increase access to PrEP services among these women. And this is some of the PrEP in the City campaigns material that were disseminated and promoted throughout Bangkok metropolitan area as well. And at the clinic level, we also used the gain frame counseling for PrEP, because we thought that when offering PrEP to the transgender women, we also, healthcare providers, they also forgot that sometimes they're just stigmatizing, you know, without intention when they offer PrEP to the transgender clients. So we just developed a set of gain frame counseling messages for PrEP specifically. And we tested at the Tangerine Clinic, and we found that by using the gain frame counseling approach for PrEP, they are really to increase the PrEP uptake among the transgender women who came to visit the Tangerine Clinic as well. And here's the data that were presented at the International AIDS Conference last year in Montreal. We were able to increase PrEP uptake among those women who perceived themselves at HIV risk, or those, and also those who did not. Because as a screening, normally you're going to use the HIV risk behavior questionnaire, right, to screen all the eligibility criteria in order to make sure that that individual, they are appropriate for PrEP or not. But without intention, we really stigmatizing our populations and our clients at the clinic. So we just starting again that by using the gain frame positive messages to encourage and empower the individual in order to empower them to make their informed decision whether or not PrEP is right for them. And I think in 2019, we have seen, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen the emerging health needs among the transgender population that we are serving. It's mental health. So we thought that, so while the transgender peer counselors and staff, they are offer other services, why don't they offer this mental health service integration? And we also conducted an implementation study to see the feasibility and acceptability around mental health service integration at the Tangerine Clinic. And on your right-hand side, these are the data that were shared by after the transgender-led depression screening was conducted. And we have seen the data that around almost 20% they reported having moderately severe or severe depressive symptoms. It's also alarming to see that around 8% of the transgender clients, they endorse suicide items in the PHQ-9 questionnaire as well. So, when we have been implementing the Tangerine Clinic as part of the key population-led health services, the model of the key population-led health services has been expanded through different mechanisms of collaboration. Right now, we have collaborated with many civil society organizations and other development agencies to expand the transgender competent care and key population-led health service model throughout the region. It's also other countries, especially in low and middle income countries, in order to replicate the key population-led health service model in their countries as well. And these are the data was shared by Dr. Nini Thun from Myanmar. They actually replicated the model that we are doing at the Tangerine Clinic. And when she went back home in Myanmar, she was able to establish a transgender clinic called DAISY. And the clinic was open during the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as it was also during the political unrest in the country as well. But these data showing to you were very impressive. You can see that 100% of those who diagnosed with HIV, they were able to initiate ART. And 60% of those without HIV, they were successfully enrolled in PrEP services as well. So, however, I'm not sharing with you about the successful stories from my countries or regions. I understand that in terms of scaling up key population-led health services around the world, they're still challenging. This is the data actually came from UNAIDS in 2021. In 46 countries, there are still over-restrictive requirement for HIV care that need to be conducted at facility-based organization only. And in 66 countries, there's a lack of social contracting mechanism or other financial mechanism to support the community-led organization to deliver the HIV services. And in 22 countries, there are also overly restrictive criteria for eligibility for community-based organizations to deliver HIV services in their countries. And in conclusion, I think it's time for us to shift the paradigm from community engagement to community leadership. Community or key population need to be at the front row or need to be the leader in their HIV response. And as a healthcare providers, academia or researcher, we have the role to support and to strengthen their capacity in order to ensure the sustainability of the community-led organizations. Second, key population-led health services can potentially be adapted to other emerging health priorities. We know that long-acting cabotegravir using as PrEP is coming or is on the way. We have other emerging health concerns as well, viral hepatitis C or substance use that can be used the framework of the key population-led health services as well. And lastly, domestic financing and enabling policy and legal environment must be well established in order to ensure the sustainability of the community-led and community-owned response to HIV. And I would like to acknowledge all the supports and the fundings from these funders, development agencies, especially civil society organizations and these colleagues who have made the key population-led health service model possible in our country. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all our speakers and to the chairs. We actually have about 4 minutes before tea and coffee. I mentioned the word coffee and everyone starts to jitter. So we could take 1 or 2 questions to our panel members who are eagerly sitting in the front row. If not, we could just dive in and have coffee. Any hands? You have to speak with a microphone because we're live streaming.
Use this one.
Dr. Catalan.
Thank you. I wanted to ask the big data speaker, thank you. I think it's fantastic what you've said, but my concern is who owns the data? Imagine Uganda government had this, or Putin, or a Trump-led administration control the data, or even insurance companies. So how can we guarantee that it's not being misused or used for discrimination?
So the data ownership, their laws guiding the use of the data, HIPAA guides the use of the data, the patient owns the data, but even the data that we use, it's not subpoenable. So we have restrictions from a research perspective where you can't sue us, or the government can't sue us to get. So there are all of those built in, which is a challenge because NIH, for good reasons, now wants data to be fair and accessible, but that data is so confidential and so high that we can't make it available. You can go back and ask for it, and they're going to kind of put barriers to it, again, to maintain patient confidentiality and privacy, but that's just the nature of the things that we do. So yeah, those are important problems or issues that we have to focus on, ethics and patient privacy.
Thank you. Any more? Stunned and shocked? Well, let's call this session to a close then. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to a final and very productive day.